now welcome Sir Rodney Brooke, Chairman of QAA Board, onto the stage to formally open this year's QAA Annual Conference.
Well, thanks, John, and a welcome to you all, and congratulations on getting across the snow, with a special congratulation to those who managed to do it in high heels. I'm lost in admiration of that. Well, I formally open the conference in this splendid venue, the Surgeons' Hall, where in the museum you can almost literally hear rattling in the cupboard the skeletons collected by Burke and Hare. Don't miss the pocketbook made from Burke's skin, a rather macabre exhibit which you can see across the way. Well, can I thank our official sponsors, act.jobs.act.uk, Find Examiners and Tempest Limited, and a special thank you for the Times Hire, who for the second year running have been the media partners in the conference. The theme of this year's conference is Confidence in the Future, assessing the benefit of quality assurance and the way in which quality assurance safeguards the reputation of UK higher education and the student experience. And I'm deeply conscious of the synergy we get in the 4 countries from the different experiences in those countries, and specifically some of the approaches pioneered in Scotland, like student engagement, the international dimension and enhancement. Well, this year we're delighted that Dr. Judith Eaton, President of the Council for Higher Education Accreditation in the United States, and Martin Durl, Chief Executive of the Association of Colleges, will be giving keynote speeches, and I shall look forward to a discussion chaired by Jack Grove of Times Higher this afternoon on the quality assurance implications of MOOCs, massive open online courses, which I see this week Michael Barber has suggested might replace the traditional university unless they pull out their fingers. Well, Jack Grove will be joined by Rajay Naik from the Open University, Martin Williams from DBiz, and the QAA's Director of Reviews, Stephen Jackson. And before the close of the programme, there'll be a QAA question time panel focusing on student engagement and chaired by my board colleague, Dan Derricott. He'll be joined by Rachel Wenston of NUS, Emilia Todorova from Glasgow Caledonian, Gwen van der Velden from the University of Bath, and Camille Candico from King's College London. And you can see a list of the 2 sessions of breakout seminars, all in this building, in your delegate packs. Well, last year's QAA annual conference trended number 1 in the UK on Twitter. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but it was clearly, it was obviously very good anyway, and we want to do the same again. So please do get tweeting over the day using our conference hashtag QAA2013, QAA2013. The whole of today's proceedings are being filmed, and editor highlights will be on the QAA website, so now is your chance to star on the silver screen. But before Anthony McLaren, the QAA Chief Executive, steps onto the stage, we'd like to show you a short video on QAA's work in the last year.
QAA provides external quality assurance for higher education across the UK. QAA is funded by, on one hand, the institutions that we review, on the other hand by the funding councils in each part of the UK who contract with us to conduct quality assurance to reassure them about the quality of the provision that they're funding. And that means that we are independent, but working in partnership to achieve that public reassurance of quality and standards. One of the major achievements over the last year has been the redevelopment of what we call the UK Quality Code.
The Quality Code sets out nationally agreed expectations and guidelines that all UK higher education providers are expected to meet, and it's been influenced by decision makers from across the UK, and it's been shaped and formed by the institutions. It's used not just by QAA in reviews, but plenty of institutions also use it as a development tool.
We've added new sections which bring to the forefront concerns about student involvement in higher education and about public information.
The review is a means of evaluating the university or college's educational provision, and this is done via the university or college submitting some evidence and then a visit by the QAA review team.
We put together teams of peers, peer review. These are academic staff and students who go in to ask questions, to meet with people, meet with students, meet with lots of staff, testing the evidence that they've been provided with, finding out how those standards are being met and how improvements are being brought about. We've introduced recently, actually, a logo scheme for our subscribing institutions who've gone through a review successfully. They're now able to use a logo, a quality mark, to say that they've done that. Every review we produce will generate a list of commendations, examples of good practice, specific references to the things that a university or a college is doing particularly well. But we'll also draw attention to the things that they need to improve. Access to higher education is a really critical area of activity for us. Every year it enables something like 20,000 mature students who, for whatever reason, have got no traditional qualifications to find their way into higher education. For QAA, one of our major areas of growing activity is and will be our engagement with employers. We want to work more closely with them, and one of the ways in which we're doing that is by taking on and developing an employer-based training database.
It's important for the QAA to be transparent to the public so that the public and students in particular can see the benefits of quality assurance and of the work that the QAA does.
We're tweeting, we're on Facebook, we're making podcasts. We've made a lot of efforts to make sure that the work that we do is directly communicated to the public. We've redesigned our website. We've made a lot of what we do far more accessible.
Quality assurance matters not just to those students currently engaged in higher education, but for years to come, the prospective students who are going to attend those universities and colleges.
Last year, as many of you will remember, we held our annual conference in Church House, the home of the Church of England's General Synod. Ever ambitious, we tried this year for the Sistine Chapel, but found that it had been block booked. Thank you to staff and student representatives from subscribing institutions and to all the other guests who are joining us here today. Welcome to you all, and again, well done for getting through some rather challenging weather conditions. Garrison Keillor said that March is the month that shows people who don't drink exactly how a hangover feels, and there's some truth in that. But I take comfort, I think, from the words of the ancient Chinese proverb, "Better the chill blast of winter than the hot breath of a pursuing elephant." I'll leave you to ponder that. As Rodney said, the theme for this year's annual conference is confidence in the future, assessing the benefits of quality assurance. I want to take an opportunity now to say something about what we've achieved over the past year, to highlight some of the elements that are coming up in the conference today, and some of the challenges that we face in our work in quality assurance. I want to underline some of the themes that were highlighted for you in the film and reiterate some of the, I think, significant developments that have taken place over the last year, in which many people in this room, of course, have played a part. Now, we've been around now since 1997, and there have been an enormous number of changes since that time, but the fundamentals remain. Each university and college responsible for ensuring that appropriate standards are being achieved and that a good quality education is being offered. As autonomous institutions, they set, maintain, and assure these standards. QAA provides external quality assurance through peer review, and QAA is independent of those who fund HE and those who deliver it. In the light of current debates, which may feature in some of our discussions today about the burden of regulation, it's just worth reflecting on a moment on that journey since 1997, the strongly deregulatory momentum which has been maintained during that period over the past 15 years, from the removal of subject review in 2001, discipline trails in 2005, or the progressive lengthening of the cycle of review, and the reduction, and in some review methods now, the removal of the need for paper documentation. But that will be a key theme, I think, the balance between assurance and deregulation through many of our discussions today. In our review methods, we've made significant developments, driven in part south of the border in response to the 2009 Westminster Select Committee report. In particular, I draw attention to the transition to new review methods, notably IRENE, institutional review in England and Northern Ireland, developed after extensive consultation with the sector, launched in 2011-12, replacing institutional audit, with a new focus on the student interest and public information. Again, two key themes which will feature in many of the discussions today. Concern schemes, and you saw that alluded to in the film, a method of enabling direct, rapid investigation of particularly acute concerns about threats to quality or standards in particular institutions. We focused on the need to renew the framework for our work in the Quality Code for Higher Education. Again, you see there the cover of the brief guide, and that's been, I think, one of our, I wouldn't say biggest selling because it was free, but one of our most popular publications, reprinted on several occasions. The central component of the framework, which is the UK Quality Code, setting out the expectations that all providers of higher education are required to meet. It will be completed by the end of this calendar year, and it replaces, as some of you will know, the former academic infrastructure. It brings together in one place all of our guidance for higher education providers, but also, for the first time, and again, key themes here which will reverberate through the day, chapters on the quality of teaching and learning. And as I say that, I kind of reflect that, in a way, it's odd that it's the first time that that's actually featured. But student engagement, student support, and information, the publication of information by institutions about higher education. Let me link that today to one of the breakout sessions this morning, beyond box ticking, the Quality Code as an enhancement tool, because of course it isn't simply about threshold standards, very much about enhancement, and Melinda Drowley is going to be chairing that session. We've placed a progressively strong emphasis on the greater centrality of students in quality assurance, making student engagement the first aim of our 3-year strategic plan that began in 2011 and concludes next year in 2014. There have been major changes to QAA's approach to student engagement, with the introduction of student reviewers, greater involvement of student representatives in the review process, and a formal role for students in QAA governance through a student advisory board and 2 student members of our board of directors. Scotland, as Rodney has already alluded, led the way, and what a rewarding path that's proved to be, entirely contrary to some of the more gloomy predictions from commentators about the allegedly disastrous effects of including students closely in the quality assurance of their own higher education. Our experience so far is that this has been an unmitigated success, and there will be many opportunities today to discuss the contribution that students are making to quality assurance. Much greater emphasis placed by QAA, as you've heard and as you've seen, on providing accessible information about the quality of higher education for a broader public, for a non-technical, non-specialist audience. It's been a period of challenge and change, but these developments underline the fact that today QAA continues as an independent body with autonomous responsibility for its operations. Its external quality assurance processes and judgments are driven by criteria and methodologies which may be influenced by third parties but cannot be dictated by them. And indeed, with the recent additional responsibility we've taken on behalf of the UK Border Agency, QAA has expanded its remit, bringing closer the strategic ideal of ensuring that all HE, whether offered in private or publicly funded institutions or in higher or further education institutions, all of that HE is quality assured within the same and according to the same quality framework. Now, you saw in the film that one of our more recent innovations is the introduction as a result, actually, of the consultation that we conducted in England on the new review method, the introduction of a logo scheme for those who've had a positive outcome from QAA review. There again are those marks with the date underneath, because, of course, date and shelf life is very important. Again, can I draw your attention to a particular element of the programme today, which will be a breakout session called The Value of Quality Marking, Building Confidence in Quality and Standards, and that's going to be chaired by our Head of Corporate Governance, who is John Levitt. Now, it's natural in the annual conference to review the achievements of the past year, and I wanted to just spend a little bit of time underlining some of those. The Eskimos have 100 words for snow, we're told. Higher education, and particularly quality assurance in higher education, rivals that record for the number of acronyms we're able to generate, and I do apologise for those. They seem quite hard to avoid. Last summer marked the successful completion of the first year of IRENE, Institutional Review for England and Northern Ireland. It also marked introducing a theme around college-based higher education. It also marked the end of the Integrated Quality and Enhancement Review method for FE institutions, but its replacement by Review for College Higher Education, RCHE, and again linking that to comments that we're going to be hearing later from Martin. It was the first year of educational oversight review for the UK Borders Agency. In the year in question, we published 117 educational oversight reviews, 107 of those published reviews indicating that the institutions under review had reached a satisfactory outcome and they were therefore able to hold highly trusted sponsor status and recruit international students. Access to higher education. The annual Key Statistics report last summer showed that the programme, which is the responsibility of QAA, working with authorised validating agencies and, of course, the colleges who deliver the programmes, now something like 1,600 courses being offered for 45,000 registered learners. And last year, over 22,000 former Access to HE students accepted for entry to UK higher education courses, an increase of more than 60% in just 2 years. I think Rodney, in his introduction to the programme for the conference, talks about the unsung quality of this work. Let's please all try and sing this a little more loudly, because it's forming a critical contribution at a time when we know there are particular challenges for mature students in the current economic climate. I mentioned the development of the Quality Code, continuing on track now with the publication of a number of chapters and on target to be completed by the end of this year. The redevelopment and relaunch of the Higher Education Empirical Research Database and the Employer-Based Training Accreditation scheme. Both of those have taken place. Both of them have found a new home in QAA, and they've been launched as part of the expansion of the knowledge and information-based services which we offer. Our international activity continues to have a very positive impact on the reputation of our higher education sector, and indeed, I would argue, on the reputation of QAA's activity itself as a quality assurance agency. We continue as members of the European Quality Assurance Association, ENQA, and indeed also the International Network for Quality Assurance Agencies in Higher Education, QAA. And both those memberships are very important to us. If we are focusing at the moment particularly on a membership of ENQA, that's because we're bracing ourselves to be reviewed by ENQA later this year in a couple of months' time, where we will be measured against the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance to see how we are complying with those. Very much part of our engagement in the wider agenda of Bologna and the European higher education area. We've signed memoranda of understanding with different countries over the year, including the Council for Private Education, a recently formed body in Singapore, with our, I would say, old friends actually in MQA, the Malaysian Quality Agency, and recently, very recently, and in fact there's a photo of me with Carol Nicol, the Chief Commissioner of TEQSA, the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency of Australia, again a recently formed body, and I was there at Universities Australia conference a couple of weeks ago when Carol and I signed a memorandum of understanding for greater work between our two agencies. In February this year, we signed an information sharing agreement with Ofqual to share information about the awarding bodies with which we are both involved. And I'm particularly pleased to see Rob Behrens here today, the independent adjudicator from the Office of the Independent Adjudicator. And at the end of last year, we signed an information sharing agreement with OIA. Indications of a very outward-looking agency, an agency that wants to work in partnership with other agencies and with other institutions overseas and domestically. Now, back to the core business of reviews. We're now consulting on another new method, and I was reflecting on the 3.5 years I've been Chief Executive of QAA. I can't recall a month where we haven't either been waiting for the outcomes of, responding to the outcomes of, designing the results of a consultation on a new review method. The pace of change is now continual and to some degree relentless, but I think we're responding to it very strongly. This new review method, higher education review, will cover all providers of HE in England and Northern Ireland. And there is a breakout session today, Higher Education Review, What Does It Mean for Institutions?, which will be chaired by Professor Tony Chapman, Vice-Chancellor of Cardiff Metropolitan University. The new Higher Education Review takes on board the clear messages from the result of the Higher Education Funding Council for England's consultation on a more risk-based approach for quality assurance. How can that be put in place while at the same time maintaining robust and rigorous oversight? It's going to lead to the tailoring of the intensity of different reviews at different institutions. And I do think this represents an important and really significant development in the practice of quality assurance within the work of QAA. We've been asked to target our resources where they're most needed and conversely to limit the demands on those providers who are demonstrably successful in managing academic standards and quality. But defining both of those categories is, of course, where the art and science will lie. Not easy questions to answer, and a lot of work is going in at the moment on working out how best we could do that. Our consultation document is out there, and I urge those of you who haven't yet responded to do so. We want the widest possible range of opinions as we take it forward. It's important, of course, that students are at the heart of the review process, and we believe the proposals we've set out further strengthen the role that students have to play and helping, therefore, to ensure that review outcomes really deliver benefits for students. We're currently in discussion with BIS and with the English Funding Council to finalise the arrangements for the quality assurance of those colleges seeking, those private providers seeking designation to receive students who themselves are in receipt of student loan funding, and that discussion is close to conclusion. We're going to be adapting the review method that we have developed and operated very successfully for the past year in relation to educational oversight, which I mentioned a moment ago. We're also looking forward to working ever more closely with FE colleges as we see the development, again, particularly in England, of the delivery of higher education within FE colleges. But again, I'm not going to steal Martin's thunder by dwelling too much on that now. It will, however, mean a very significant increase in the number of subscribers to QAA, and a challenge to us, which we're now working on, of making sure that the services that we provide, the relationship that we have with our subscribing institutions, it reflects the fact that those subscribing institutions are increasingly not only numerous, of course, but very diverse in their needs, in their traditions, in their history, in the way that they wish to work with us. So that, I think, is going to be a very important piece of work for us over the coming year. Now, looking at work across the UK, starting, of course, with Scotland, now having embarked upon Enhancement-Led Institutional Review 3, based on the two very successful predecessors to that, and that method is going to run until 2016. New handbook is published, reviewers have been trained, and the first of the new reviews started on schedule last month. The revision of methodology also includes a new element of annual reporting on each institution to the Scottish Funding Council, and the first reports under that model will be produced in autumn this year. Can I also plug the Enhancement and Innovation in Higher Education Conference to be held later this year, 11th to 13th of June, in Glasgow. So please, if you haven't signed up for that, do so. That's going to be a very significant conference later this year. Colleagues in Scotland are celebrating 10 years of national enhancement themes, and that foregrounding of enhancement, so important within the Scottish method. And I have to say, referring back to the consultation that took place in England, we were delighted to receive such strong affirmation from HEFCE's consultation of the importance that colleagues in England also place upon ensuring that enhancement remains key to the model of quality assurance we have. There is no mood simply to go for a reductive approach to meeting threshold standards. It's always got to be also about improvement and enhancement. And I'm highly encouraged by that. There's going to be a breakout session this morning, institutional self-evaluation around enhancement, and Bill Harvey, Director of QAA Scotland, will be on the panel for that session. In Wales, a white paper consultation last year on the Welsh Government's draft Further and Higher Education Bill proposed fewer, stronger Welsh institutions with greater critical mass, able, it was argued, to compete internationally in terms of research and the student experience. It added, significantly, we do not believe in driving up quality on the basis of competition and customer choice, and propose an alternative means which does not rely on market mechanisms. And just to read out that sentence to you indicates the very different policy frameworks within which we work in the various parts of the UK. In England, of course, the market mechanism as a means of improving quality, central to many of the developments that have taken place recently. So interacting and making sure that the quality code can interact effectively in very different policy contexts remains central to our work. From QAA's point of view, we now have a revised and strengthened QAA Wales Committee and an office in Cardiff, which we share with the National Union of Students in Wales. I announced that that was going to happen at last year's conference, and I'm delighted to confirm that it has happened and the office is up and running. In April last year, Northern Ireland launched its first ever higher education strategy, Graduating to Success, detailing the direction for higher education policy in Northern Ireland up to 2020. and an intention to establish a single quality assurance framework for all higher education provision, including college-based higher education, and that work to be completed by 2016. We will be cooperating with colleagues in Northern Ireland to make sure that that is fully achievable. Let me say something briefly about quality assurance and the public. We're currently conducting research into the public understanding of quality and standards in the context of higher education. The results of that research we are hoping to publish in July, later this year. We think it will help both the sector and QAA understand issues around public communication. And those issues, of course, have been the subject of so much debate, not only here, but internationally as well. How does quality assurance effectively communicate itself to that much wider public? Quality assurance and students, again, a key theme. Let me return to it. As I mentioned earlier on, students have been increasingly involved in the assurance and enhancement of the higher education learning experience in the planning and governance processes of higher education institutions. Their voices are heard loud and clear, and their views are being taken seriously. It's vital that we listen to what is said and that we act on those voices. Yes, students provide feedback on their courses through standard module surveys, but they also do a lot more, contributing to the development of learning and teaching in subject areas, actively shaping their own education, participating in university and college decision-making processes, representing student views on the future direction and management of an institution through their representative bodies. We have, I hope, created many opportunities for students actively to engage and shape the quality of their experience. Their engagement, your engagement, as students committed to quality assurance, helps shape our understanding and the sector's understanding of what is good and, conversely, what is bad practice. It improves individual quality at institutions, and it improves quality across the whole sector. Student engagement in our review processes at QAA is now absolutely central, and our Student Advisory Board has reminded us forcibly that the student voice in institutions is never more powerful than in the year running up to QAA review. That's a responsibility that we take incredibly seriously. The challenge for the future is how to ensure that in the years after that review, the momentum for change and improvement is still maintained. We currently have a pool of over 100 student reviewers, including 28 student reviewers in Scotland. We have 2 members of our board, as I've mentioned, Dan Derrickett and Rachel Wenston, Vice President of NUS. The Student Advisory Board has become part of the formal governance mechanisms of QAA, and we have students sitting on our main board. Prospective students can, and we hope will increasingly, use information from QAA reviews to help inform choice when considering the place of study. Our reviews of institutions are freely available on our website, but we're also in the process of ensuring that they can be found in those places where students seek prospective students seek information about the courses that are available to them. So we're talking to UCAS, to Unistats, and to the Which University Guide to make sure that our information doesn't depend on people only making a decision to come to our website, but that they're able to find it in the search journeys they're making themselves. You've heard already about our engagement with employers, and I also want to add to that a brief mention, and there is more information in the pack about QAA enterprises building on those knowledge and information resources that I mentioned early on. This is now the banner for our services under those areas where we are able to offer the expertise of QAA staff, of QAA reviewers, to those who wish to use them, wish to work with them, and wish to take that expertise to advance their own journeys, often towards the improvement of quality and standards in all parts of the world. And we're delivering training now in a very, very wide variety of international settings. You've heard mention also of EBTA, the Employer-Based Training Accreditation database, which is now with us and is forming part of the way in which we are seeking to engage more deeply with employers in the way that we have engaged so successfully with students. We want to make the same kind of step change in our relationship with employers and with their engagement in the work we do in quality assurance as we have already done with students. That's the challenge we've set ourselves, and we want to make sure that in the coming year we push forward hard in that particular direction. So, let me conclude at that point, but just mention a few things that I want you to bear in mind as we go through the conference today. We're looking to identify benefits. We're looking to identify impact. We're seeking to be challenged by you in that endeavour, and for you to talk to us and communicate to us those areas where you feel progress has been made, those areas where you feel more progress needs to be made. So be involved, be challenging. Do get involved with all the meetings today, including the Fringe meeting on social media, and there's more information about that in your packs. Please do visit the hub at lunchtime to get more information on QAA's work, and Richard, no doubt, at one of his interludes will tell us exactly where the hub could be found. I hope you enjoy today's conference. I hope you find it rewarding and valuable, and I just wanted to finish by thanking you for attending today, thanking you for playing the crucial role that all of you do in QAA's work, thanking you for your commitment to the public assurance of quality and standards in our higher education system. Thank you all very much indeed.
System, though we don't acknowledge it as such. In the continental understanding, a vet system is well known and referred to consistently, and actually in terms of equality of regard in a similar way to an academic route. We do have an adult community education system, I have to say, in some regards, in its dying embers, I might argue, and we do have a higher education system. So we have a system of systems. Within that, there is a school sector, a private training sector, a college sector, and a university sector. So I think it's much more useful to define sectors by institutions and their intentions and their characteristics, rather than to refer to sectors by what they do. If we go back to the systems, the college sector delivers to all of those various systems. It delivers to the compulsory education system to 16 to 18-year-olds and has recently been given the option of recruiting directly at 14. It, interestingly, notwithstanding the impression some people might have of the old tech colleges and night schools, 60% of what colleges do, and this is globally and it varies according to individual college, is 16 to 18 work or pre-19 work. The community education system, that which is learning for its own sake or to improve life chance or just happiness, if you like, has been largely worked out of the college system. An issue we might return to in questions. 5%, and then only 25% of what colleges do is actually what you might say is their core business or people perceive as being their core business. And they also provide 10%, it varies according to how you measure higher education, interestingly, if it's non-prescribed, higher education, prescribed higher education, or professional qualifications. But we count it as about 10%. Those are rough and ready reckoners as to what colleges do. So this college sector delivers in each of those ways. What defines then the college sector? Well, I think you can define it in terms of what the character of its HE is. Now, when I come to the HE and FE is insulting, what I mean is the phrase higher education and further education is insulting, because it implies colleges are making provision in someone else's sector or having to have permission to deliver in that sector, and can only provide that which they're allowed to deliver in that sector, and it has no validity of itself or value in itself as a distinct and different product or service. What I like better, I have to say, is, and I commend here particularly the QAA, the title of the presentation this morning is College-Based Higher Education. That better, I think, describes what we do. Within that, there's a very strong subset. The defining subset in what colleges do in higher education is higher vocational education. Interesting to go into a further definitional debate about what that might include. Does it include the kind of denizens of this building, surgeons, which seem to me a pretty vocational set of higher education routes, as interestingly would pilots of aeroplanes? Well, thinking about what vocational means is something that perhaps we need to do a little more around. But higher vocational education, I think, is a good subtitle for much of what colleges do, in distinction to some universities, not all universities. So what's these characteristics that define what a college is? Well, first of all, a college is local. Some colleges deliver regionally, some deliver nationally, but perforce and to the greatest extent, they are local. They serve a local community. The college, the Manchester College, is the college for Manchester. It delivers to people in Manchester. It delivers to the skills base. It increases aspirations and delivers prospects for better careers to people in Manchester. It might have a regional effect, but it does not seek in that core provision to be a national player. Universities, in the greatest extent, recruit on a national basis or a regional basis. Many of them will say they are local universities, but they're not local, I would submit to you, in the same degree or to the same extent that colleges are. So there may be a university that has a huge, the Manchester universities have a huge economic effect upon Manchester, but they're not intended to be serving the skills needs directly of Manchester or its sub-region. They have a different mission and character to colleges. That reflects itself in the type of provision or the students that colleges most often serve. 70% of them living within 25 miles. If we went further, I think you'd find a large number of those that live outside 25 miles are in rural areas where they travel in just over 25 miles, but normally they are local to the college. Secondly, the provision is intended to be and is flexible. The whole of the college provision overall needs to be flexible to change to market conditions. It's supplying to a number of different government departments and different funding streams. It has become very flexible. It becomes what the community needs it to be in order to provide the service that the community requires and employers in that community are asking for. So 65% over 23 and 60% part-time. I mean, though there's been some good news around growth of college-based higher education, the threat to part-time provision, I think, is one that I'm very concerned to discussion of how we encourage more part-time provision, a stated government objective, but not one that's actually being realised in the latest round of recruitment. And it needs to be and should be responsive to local need and demand. 50% of all college provision is either foundation degrees or H&Ds and HNCs. Much else is professional qualifications delivered on behalf of employers or responsive to employers or to enable people to progress in their careers as they are in work and continuing to work. A couple of other characteristics which mark this. It is teaching, not research-led, and I use the word wants to, advisedly, be business-facing and industry-led. I have not come across an existential debate in a single college about what it's for in terms of creating new knowledge or learning for its own sake being the primary driver of what colleges do in this area. It's not to say that colleges do not see the benefit. I mean, the previous skills minister, John Hayes, waxed eloquent about the aesthetic beauty of vocational education in terms of self-realisation for the individual. But I would submit to you those are consequential benefits, not central intentions of what college-based higher education is about. It wants to be business-facing. It wants to be industry-led. There are a number of barriers that prevent colleges from doing that, not least funding streams and insecurity around some of those funding streams. But I would also suggest one of the things that stops them being business-facing to the degree that they might wish to is their partnerships with universities and the way in which universities do validation agreements and the way in which they see quality and see rigour within college-based higher education. And to final proposition, with stunned silence, feudalism won't work in the 21st century. Well, it did work for universities in the 20th century. Someone said to me that university-college relationships were like a slave and a master, and I countered immediately by modifying that extreme statement by saying slaves didn't get paid. Colleges do get paid, but the squires decided what they were going to teach and how much they were going to get paid for teaching it. That is not at the core of an innovative, responsive higher education system in the 21st century. That relationship, which I have to say is, I think, deeply embedded in a class consciousness in our country and also around a managerial culture, implies there is a hierarchy of provision, and it's almost that was the week that was. We all look down, I look down on him, and he looks down on him, and he looks down on him. That, I think, is kind of just not redolent of the way in which we'll need to work in the 21st century. So, we have a number of mechanisms applying right now. The numbers control, and I think with this audience people will rail against it, I will agree with you, is a numbers control regime having been introduced by the current government is flawed. But from a college perspective, it's probably the least worst system we could apply here, because it allows colleges to grow their higher education provision in a controlled or in a constrained market. I actually think that numbers control could be relaxed considerably because student demand is ebbing in a way in which the market will find its level in terms of what the demand is. Nonetheless, colleges bid for marginal growth and they achieved better than the universities that bid for marginal growth. We all undershot the margins that we bid for, but colleges undershot by a considerably lower degree, as reported in the Times Higher recently. And there has been overall a 7% growth in college-based higher education in the last year. Interestingly also, where colleges were previously having franchised arrangements through universities and delivering university numbers, in many cases colleges bid for a margin and the universities stripped out precisely the same amount of money that colleges bid for the margin to balance it off as a zero gain. So the college did not grow its provision. But it did change the power relationship because the college owned their own numbers rather than being beholden to the university. Now, I'm making these quite, I think, provocative statements. I will acknowledge there are some really powerful and useful partnerships between colleges and universities conducted through a franchising arrangement. I would say from a strategic perspective, if I'm advising a college, quite often those depend on the view of the senior management and particularly the Vice-Chancellor in relation to partnering activities. And if I'm being a realist, most institutions act as to institutional self-interest eventually, and that leaves the college in a vulnerable position when its numbers are owned by a university and it delivers on that franchise basis. Moving to this situation with more direct funding, I think, has altered the relationship between colleges and universities. So too has the debate, and you'll see a lot this week in National Apprenticeship Week, about higher apprenticeships. Having a route that allows young people to progress from the level 2-3 apprenticeship that many are doing now, and that's been considerable growth. 3 years ago, a survey indicated those who are completing level 3 apprenticeships, over 50% of them wish to carry on their studies and to improve their trade, skill, occupation to a higher level, but only 5% of them did. They did not find a route forward which matched their learning style and how they had achieved hitherto. Higher apprenticeships offers them that style of learning and that approach, which is different to that which is applied for a traditional academic model. What I deduces a couple of conclusions there. I think there will be a growing market in validation rather than franchised numbers. Interesting for, I know the group of universities do specialise in this area. My first degree was awarded through the Council of National Academic Awards. We don't ever go back in England. We go back to the future and call it something else sometimes. But universities providing a specialised and particularly orientated service around validation for colleges, I think, is an interesting perspective to have here, and much more a market around those services being provided and the support being provided as a part of the validation service. I think after a slow start, colleges will be looking for foundation degree awarding powers, and some are exploring teaching degree awarding powers. Interesting in those circumstances, if they feel the need, I would suggest, not on my previous analysis about being very local, the need to actually progress as the polytechnics did to a university title, and as the university colleges feel they need to progress to full-blown university status. I think many colleges may achieve FDAP and or TDAP, but have no wish to call themselves a university, because it will defeat the character and mission of what they are actually integrally about. They might become colleges of higher and further education, but actually that which describes what they do. All of that sounds and is very transactional, because I think we've been in a transactional world, and I'd be held up by colleagues like Andy Westwood about, let's start talking about transformational business rather than the transactional outcome, and focus on the benefit of the student and the communities and the businesses that we both support. So I think we need to actually move past this stage, because I don't think feudalism work in the 20th century will work, but genuine partnerships will. And I mean, this is kind of just truisms, really. What is about a true partnership seems to me would be about shared respect between equals who bring something different to the party, but of equal and corresponding or complementing value. And that generates extra mutual value. I think there's also a point here that you see partnerships properly seen are seen in the medium term, not in the short term. There's a 5-year focus about being together, almost through the vagaries of detailed government policies. If it's a right thing to do, it will maintain and sustain itself through these kind of transactional ups and downs that are currently applying. So what does that mean? Get to the punchline, because this conference is this conference, about what does it mean for quality assurance. Well, first of all, a point I think we need to make, colleges, because they supply to many different systems, actually undergo multiple forms of quality assurance. QAA is not the only quality assurance game in town for colleges. The one that's most uppermost in most colleges' kind of concerns, because their jobs depend on it, is actually Ofsted, and it's what Sir Michael Wilshaw does and says about a college and its provision overall. I have some reservations, and I've made those known, that particularly for that post-compulsory education phase, that actually I don't know that Ofsted is the right vehicle for quality assuring that provision at all levels. Colleges have been given a greater degree of autonomy than ever before to decide whom they teach and also what they teach. Prior to 18, there is a national curriculum and there is an admissions code. That then provides a solid basis for something like Ofsted to inspect against a similar product wherever it exists within the market, 16 to 18, in a school, in a sixth form college, in a general further education college, or in a specialist college. But for vocational provision and that which colleges can decide to vary the mix, I do not believe necessarily that Ofsted is the right vehicle for that. And I would suggest there may be an expanded role for quality QAA in this area, or alternatively, and that was interestingly picked up in the Lingfield review into professionalism within the further education sector, I wish they called it system, and to look into the future of that, or perhaps even, but you never go this direction, to recreate a Quango. The adult learning inspectorate could see a rebirth around this area, much more focused on work-based learning, vocational provision, and around autonomous institutions. Second consideration, I think, we need to counter the academic managerial bias within our system. I mentioned the class issue here, but we do seem to revert to a managerial bias first, in that we tend to see anybody who's progressing beyond the shop floor to progress to a managerial or a supervisory role. Now that's perfectly valid and right, so you broaden the individual to move to higher levels. We don't, I think, give sufficient attention to, in the vocational field, about deepening expertise in a particular area. So you move from, in my old world, from the armed forces, from being an airframes technician to becoming a deep expert in composite wing manufacture and maintenance, which doesn't mean to say you can look at the whole aeroplane or manage other technicians, but you can become much more expert in that area of technology. So we have a bias against people who do and do better, and we have a bias towards those who manage those that do. Secondly, we have a tendency, not as bad as it is sometimes on the continent, to start with the general and then move to the specific. So we start with general theory, academic theory, and then try and apply it to practical situations, rather than the reverse, which is start with the practical and then derive wider lessons from that practical. Now, vocational education and training, I think, always starts with the practical, then draws out patterns from the practical rather than the reverse. I mean, that's challenging in quality assurance terms when people from an academic background or from a university background sit in judgment on college-based higher education. But I do think there are some real challenges to us in higher vocational education or college-based education, and it's about, for instance, defining what cutting-edge knowledge is in order to inform teaching at the higher levels, at level 4, 5, and 6, and how you ensure that's in place. The default setting on this, and I fear colleges get sucked into this, is the traditional attendance at conferences or to put papers together and demonstrate scholarly endeavour in that traditional way. As important, I would submit to you, and I think it's something that the FE Guild will need to look at, is actually working in industry or industry attachments and secondments to ensure that when you are teaching, again my analogy with aircraft techs, you've been working in British Aerospace. You know where the state of technology processes and actually what the employer needs, and that's immediately injected into your teaching to ensure the curriculum and our practice matches what industry requires in a much more organic way than it would through a traditional approach. I think the most powerful higher vocational education I've seen actually was in, I was mentioning it to Sir Rodney last night, was a Walsall Community College where they have a Roland Music Centre. Every one of the lecturers in that Roland Music Centre, teaching music technology at foundation degree level, is a practitioner in the industry, interestingly in Birmingham, in the Asian music industry, actually in the Black Country and in Birmingham, and brings that and works a part-time syllabus entirely, is a trained teacher, is aware of curriculum planning, but actually makes that link every day at work in terms of what they bring to students. But we do need to think about how we understand and promote that scholarly endeavour in higher vocational education, and I do see this as a really important role for the newly established or about to be established Further Education Guild. Might have a different name shortly, but I see it as exactly a counterpoint organisation to the Higher Education Academy, and considering what pedagogy within vocational education is, how it's best quality assured and regarded, and how rigour is maintained in a way which actually protects students, employers, and actually the government funding that goes into higher vocational education. Which brings me to my final point, is actually how you ensure rigour in this different character, equally valid and useful field of learning, but at the same time also responsiveness. Many colleges want, as I said before, to be industry-led and industry-responsive. But actually, if they find validating partners who say it will take 18 months to have this program validated and introduced, and I know that's not, there are examples of universities doing it much quicker, but it moves at a certain pace through validation. We need to kind of speed up this cycle, but still retain the rigour that's necessary to actually ensure that these programs are what they say they are and achieve what they say they should achieve. So that challenge, I think, is to both partners in all of this and to the agency about how we can ensure rigour, but also responsiveness. Very interesting to hear, Anthony, about your comments about working with industry. I'd also say, talk about my kind of ideas about partnership. I have a saying, it's a bit challenging to colleges sometimes, is in colleges, amateurs don't do higher education or international. So actually, if you're going to do this, you do this seriously and you do it with a view to the quality of what you're providing as you do in all the rest of your provision. Equally, I might say that universities, amateurs shouldn't do higher apprenticeships. College has been working with SMEs and with employers as a core business for many, many years. Universities are coming to this not late, but they tend to work with large employers and large at a distance. So I think there's something here we can learn from one another, as we might be able to learn from one another about teaching-led activity and direct teaching models. So there is, I think, a lot to learn about how we can be responsive and rigorous between us. And that was it. Happy to take any questions.
Can I ask that before you say your question, that you wait for the microphone? We have got a roving microphone going round, and that you tell us who you are so that we know. So, open to the floor.
Thank you. I'm Jo. I work for the QAA. Really interesting perspectives on higher education in colleges, and I just wondered, Martin, what your stand is on the consultation we've got at the moment on the new higher education review, which is going to look at reviewing colleges in the same way that we review universities. And do you think that's going to achieve the elusive level playing field?
I think that I'm slightly coded in my comments here. I think the association and I have commended the move to a common baseline for assessing higher education between colleges and universities. I mean, that inherently there are some challenges there for colleges in that process. Particularly, I think colleges need to ante up now and become subscribers to QAA. The board has been very gracious, I think, but also sensible in including AOC as a part owner of QAA now, together with Universities UK and Guild HE. Moving to that level playing field seems entirely consistent with that. But I do think, which is my point about the coded here, understanding quality assurance as it applies to higher vocational education is something we need to get our head around. Otherwise, the product could be subverted in the process. And I'd hate colleges just to become a grey version of universities, seeking to deliver the same programs as universities, just locally. I mean, there is great value to delivering the same program locally. If you're in Taunton and you don't want to move from Taunton, and you can do a University of Plymouth degree, which is pretty much a similar degree to the University of Plymouth in Taunton, has its value. But what I don't think it would actually necessarily recognise is the distinct value of what colleges might be able to offer to the nation and to individuals and to communities if the quality assurance mechanisms are right. So I think we do really need to have a deep and meaningful conversation about what scholarly endeavour is in higher vocational education, what's distinctive about it, how it can be represented, and how it can be checked. So yes, I like the review. Yes, I like the dialogue because we've been involved in that dialogue, but I think there needs to be an open one about how we represent what colleges do.
Hello, my name's Hugh Morris. I'm from the University of Salford, which is in Greater Manchester. You presented us with lots of very interesting ideas. I wonder if you could just say something about the material base of what might happen over the next few years. It seems to me that some of the funding changes might promote local colleges becoming more metropolitan, or dare I say even regional, and as those organisational forms change through the Skills Funding Agency and others exercising their influence, that might have implications for quality assurance directly by external agencies or through universities. I wonder if you could say something about that.
I mean, first of all, about sucking up to the questioner, can I commend the University Salford's approach to its partners in the city, the new city kind of culture, whatever it is in Salford. I was up there just recently to City of Salford College, who commended the work that's been done together there, so a really good example. In terms of, on a good day, I think I can see the coherence in government policy around funding between the skills system, the higher education system, and the school systems. And I kind of like to see through a glass darkly. I see something in there that hangs together. But on other days, I just see a series of themes. I see marketisation, I see student choice, and I see competition as common themes in the English system. But out of that, there is a mess of absolute near-term kind of contradictions and unintended consequences between funding streams. Colleges have at least 4 horses riding in the race and decide how they manage their provision against those 4 horses. School funding, higher education, HEFCE funding, the Skills Funding Agency funding, and also Department of Work and Pensions funding. And they marry those together in order to serve local communities. There is, when one stream of that activity becomes under pressure from funding, and I think the one that I would identify as being particularly under pressure now is non-higher education adult provision for colleges. That then can drive colleges into alliances to become larger in order to offset risk and actually give greater organisational resilience, which generally I think colleges handle by having kind of local provision within a larger group. And there's a very good example of the whole college group here. Gary's here, who's on the QAA board, where actually the college is very local to a number of different local communities, but gets the benefit of a group structure. So I think you'll find that the surface of this will look somewhat confusing, but I do think that core of what colleges feel they're for will maintain through this, about being place and about delivery in order to actually, if I was charged by Peter Scott or somebody, about instrumental learning rather than broader learning.
Martin, thank you very much indeed for a very provocative and some very interesting thoughts for us to take away.
Thank you.